Waffletop Podcast, and also YouTube is Waffletop Podcast, where you can find all our content, audio and videos. My name is Paulo. I've been the biggest talker. This has been a pleasure today, Rudy. Thank you very much for taking this call with me. Thank you very much for taking this call with me. This is the one-to-one interviews with Rudy Rochman and Paulo. But yeah, thank you guys. Like, share, and subscribe. This will be up on YouTube. So guys, check it out. Thank you. Not recording it. What's going on? You're listening to the Waffletop Podcast. Myself, Paulo, the biggest talker. I've got a very special guest today. Excuse me if I get this pronunciation wrong, but please correct me if I do. Is it Rudy Rochman? Rochman?
Right.
Yeah, correct. Brilliant. Literally, I started watching this guy nearing a couple of weeks ago now. He's got a lot of videos, and we will put obviously all his details in the YouTube link to this video so you guys can check him out. But really, just, some of the stuff he's recorded, I mean, you'd be shocked by it. I was just like, I don't know. Sometimes I don't know how you keep cool. I'll be honest with you, like, because that sort of thing, when you've got those sort of people, especially the videos with the neo-Nazis, like you say, who have got the most wild and, racist views about just religion and places and everything else. But just for our fans, just explain a bit about what you do so they get it from where you're coming from, just so I don't miss anything out, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so my name is Rudy, and I'm an activist for Jewish rights and for Israel. So I fight against anti-Semitism around the world. I work to empower the next generation of Jews and allies in order for us to not only narrate our story to the rest of the world, but also take our next chapter of our history into our own hands. And I work a lot in Israel to sort of bridge the gaps between a lot of the communities, whether that be the right and the left, the religious, the secular, or even the Israeli and the Palestinian. I think that the governmental structures that we have today tend to use legitimate suffering of populations to pull each other apart, to gain votes, to stay in power. Yeah. And the reality is that most people, agree with each other, want to live fine with each other, don't have necessarily any issues, but they're being pulled apart by their community leaders. So we try to work things from the grassroots level. So uniting leaders that actually represent communities and not just people in positions of power. However, there are sometimes good people in positions of power, but for the most part, usually not. And so, those are the types of things that I do.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, just wanted to touch on something you said there that interested me quite a bit. But when you sort of say about the governments and that, and just sort of so the more negative governments, which tend to be the majority, and sort of the corruptness that goes on. I mean, I see it from this side of things, and obviously you can explain from your side. But here definitely living in London, where like you've got crime rates like out of control, but partly down to the fact that they probably took away things for young people to keep themselves occupied. So obviously stuff like we had over here, like youth centres, and those sort of things, the government stopped funding those. And then what you saw was a spike in like crime, for example. So like where they would go in their lifestyles and their environments that they're in, they'd be involved in gangs and these sorts of like negative crowds. But then what youth centres done for them, just as one example, is it took them out of that environment and took them into doing something positive. If it was making videos, making music, editing music, learning different skills, that probably gave them another outlook on life. So like we have our battles here definitely with the government, and that's not just that. I mean, you look at coronavirus now, for example, nuts, because obviously here 33,000 people have died, and they're just basically saying, just be careful when you go out. Whereas before it was, you're going to get fined like £100 English pounds if you go out. But now it's a mixed message, so it's hard to understand. But more to the political side of things, definitely here we had a vote this year, and I don't think I voted for either party. The two main parties being Labour and Conservatives, I didn't vote because I just couldn't understand their policies, and I just had my own thinking behind stuff. And one may have benefited me in a certain way, but then in another way, it was just sort of like morally, I just didn't agree with it, for example. So obviously at the moment, obviously a lot of your YouTube videos as well that I see is the whole, and it is a debate where they talk about Israel, Palestine, settling there, and whose land reservedly does it belong to as such. That's what some people say. But with you, you're more of a kind of guy who is more new generation thinking in terms of you want everyone to live as one. But not many people see that. Is that right? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah. The reality is that there's no future without either population. No population is going to disappear. So regardless as to who came first, of course, we can debate the history, go over that. But towards the future, we have to create a reality where both can exist. And in order to do that, there are two things that we need to focus on that most people don't really focus on, which is one, ending the injustices for both sides, not only for one, not over one, but for both, and fulfilling the aspirations of both populations. What are the needs? What are the cultural needs? Historic needs, whatever those needs are. And finding, I work with an organization that's grassroots here in Israel. I'm part of it called Habayit. And we bring Palestinian activists and Israeli activists together to build relations both socially and economically to figure out how could we live together. And one time we made a list of the top 10 things that Israelis are suffering in terms of injustice, the top 10 things that the Palestinians are suffering in terms of injustice, the top 10 things that the Israelis had for their aspirations, and the top 10 things that the Arab Palestinians had for their aspirations, and they didn't contradict. And the goal of whatever solution will come out will have to be created on the basis of what are these injustices that have to end and aspirations fulfilled. Instead of just saying, separate yourselves, go in each in a one way that doesn't end injustices, that doesn't fulfill aspirations, or just create everyone a state without thinking. We have to create a structure that works for both. And a lot of politicians focus on imposing a solution. A lot of people will come up to me and be like, Rudy, what's your solution? And it's like, okay, I can give you hypothetical ideas of what I think a solution could look like, but a solution will be built from the bottom up, and it's a process. It's an achievement. It's not something that you just say and that's what's going to happen. So an analogy I usually give to explain to this is if let's say I'm an artist, right? And I want to make a masterpiece painting. Before I finish my masterpiece and I pick the final details, first I have to come up with the idea. Then I pick my canvas, the texture, the size. Then I pick the paintbrush, the colors. I start painting, I mess up, I fix it. And then when I finish, I take a step back and I say, oh, well, you know what? This frame is what fits the painting. And then I have my masterpiece. To talk about a solution now is like picking the frame without even to the artist coming together and figuring out what type of painting they want to build.
No, I completely understand, man. It is a really good point. It's refreshing to see because obviously growing up, the area of school I went to was very mixed. So everyone just from different backgrounds and everything else. And even then you'd even hear the debate where I'm not massively educated on it, but you'd hear the Israeli Palestine, the Palestinian sort of debate, and it was crazy just hear different points of view. But never once did I ever hear people say, how can we fix this together? Whereas opposed to, well, no, we're all right, they're all wrong. You're one of the first people I probably spoke to about this that actually said, we've both done wrong here, but what can we do to fix it as together to make? Because ultimately, you think how stronger could it be if you guys work together. So I completely get what you mean. It's you've got to come together. What's crazy though is, and I don't know if it's the same where you live, but I feel like any of these sort of issues get sorted out within the general public, not at government level. So the ones that actually push it through are just normal working class people, or normal people that work normal jobs in the daytime. It's just a passion of theirs, and they tend to push these issues through and essentially make them happen, if that makes sense. So you kind of put the government into a corner where they're like, okay, we've got X amount of people who thinks that we should try this and that like that. Because it's like it here with many things that we've protested on. We've pushed the governments to corners, and I think as a general public, you're right. You should be challenging stuff you don't agree with. I mean, it's freedom of speech at the end of the day. So I completely get what you mean. It's like, just to give you a comparison here, I don't know if you heard, but 3 years ago, we had Grenfell Tower fall down here in London. So in West London, it was like a council building, and it was a couple of hundred people in it, and like all of the structure around it hadn't been done correct, and it actually burnt the whole building, killed most of the people in it. It was a failure from probably the government because they didn't go through the planning procedures properly. In turn, 300 people lost their lives, or I don't know the exact figure, but so many hundred lost their lives, and then so many people were left without housing, for example, a basic need. And it was like for ages, it was partly one of the leaders from the government opposition Labour, who was helping in Jeremy Corbyn, but he pushed through. But then it was mainly the general public that pushed through to get them to investigate it, to do an inquiry into it, make the government do an inquiry into it, which they're going through at the moment. And I suppose where I can link it to what you're saying is like it's refreshing to see, because at the end of the day, young people are the future. So where you've got older people, and they've lived through their generation or what's done, and then now it's our turn to change it. So in 50 years' time, you want to sit there and say, look, we've done this and that, and then the younger generation after us to carry on what the work that for example, you've done. And I suppose that's what I got from your videos. In terms of, I educated myself a lot about it, because to be honest with you, the conflict as well, I didn't entirely understand it, and I was watching the videos and just trying to understand and take everything in. But then when you've got this negative side, like it's great that for example, you can work together. So you've got like obviously, as you call it, you say like the Jewish or Palestinians and Jewish people, or is that the right word? Or
well, I mean, you can say Israeli, Palestinian, Jewish.
Israeli. Yeah, Arab. Well, yeah. So you've got those two working together now to come up with a solution to make the land that they live in or share better, which is really good. But then when you see videos, when I saw the video of you going to I think it was a Comic-Con rally. Was it Comic-Con you went to?
It was the APAC conference, but there was some guy dressed up in some costume.
Oh, that was a joke. I thought it was actually Comic-Con.
I don't know what his deal is, if he dresses like that on a regular basis, or if he was just a protester and decided to dress up like that. But
because because it's crazy, because I watched that and I couldn't believe what you were saying. Like, for example, coronavirus, which has been around, like, to all of us is new. None of us has dealt with it before.
Yeah.
And then he's turned around and he said Jewish people cause coronavirus. That made me laugh, because he's just
that's the thing about anti-Semitism, that it's always about finding the source of suffering of a community or experience of pain and blaming that on the Jews. Yeah. With the Nazis, was finding the economic situation and the burdens of the economic situation, blaming that on the Jews. Yeah. The Black Plague was blamed on the Jews. Inquisition.
Didn't even know that.
Was blamed on the Jews. Anti-Semitism is rooted on finding a suffering, even the death of Jesus, blamed on the Jews, right? Find the source of suffering and pain of a community and blame that suffering on the Jews in order for the Jews to be the scapegoat of that community. And that's actually the position that Jews have had in white societies in Europe. So we were not allowed to own land and to work the land, which back in the day, before you had lawyers and businesses and all that stuff, people would grow crops and trade their crops and cattle in the market. And that's how people would make business. But Jews couldn't do that. What could Jews do? Jews were forced to be the tax collectors and people for the king and queen. And they're not even taking the money. They're giving it to the king and queen. However, we're the face of the suffering for the people, the normal people, of what is being taken from them. Who do they see directly and physically in the flesh? They see the Jews. And so the Jews have always been used as a scapegoat in societies, as blaming the suffering of that society and blaming on the Jews. So any sort of suffering that you see, now it being coronavirus, you'll always find people finding a way to attach that somehow to the Jews. We were talking earlier about how a lot of people are not able to find common ground and talk about a future. First of all, a lot of the older generation, they're very much so conditioned. Their mindset is not flexible. The older you get, the less flexible you get. That's why usually revolutions are done by people that are younger. But there are other elements as well. There's very little communication between Israelis and Palestinians. There's policies of anti-normalization, meaning you cannot discuss or engage with another person from the other side. So there's conditioning, there's anti-normalization, there's a lack of communication, but there are also powers at B that are profiting from this conflict, such as, let's say, for example, the United States. Now, I'm not saying the United States is creating the conflict in Israel. However, the foreign aid that Israel receives is not money, it's credit to receiving weapons. I'm against the U.S. foreign aid to Israel because it forces Israel to be completely dependent on U.S. weapons, and I want Israel to be completely dependent on itself and not on any other country. But in order for us to keep needing weapons, there needs to be a continuous conflict. So the powers like the U.S., who are pushing out, sort of plans for us to take, don't really have an incentive for us to come forward. And even the political sides from the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority is profiting from this entire conflict, and they want the conflict to continue. And the Israeli government, they're not doing really anything to change the conflict. That's one of my biggest criticisms of the Israeli government is because they're more of a right-wing government, and a right-wing government is elected on security. In order to be elected on security, you need to have insecurity. So if you solve the conflict and you no longer have insecurity, the right-wing government might not get elected. So the problem is that all these people have interest in this conflict going and have built their agendas around what already exists as the status quo. And it really be the opportunity and responsibility for those in the next generation to change that.
That's it. Definitely. 100% agree with you there. So, you know, when you talk about obviously the governments, especially like your for example, your government, you know, is it a kind of like with elections over there, how like do they work normally, or do you think that they're sort of put in power, you know, almost as if not say corrupt, I mean, for example, you look at, I look at Trump, for example, yeah, and he is someone who I think has been put there for whatever reason to do, you know, he's done more damage to the world than probably good, personally, I think, but he was definitely put there. I think that election was a bit rigged. You know, but when you talk about obviously changing things, do you think that there would be a time where, say, somebody like yourself, who ran to become prime minister or leader of your country, because of your sort of open and free views about, and really interesting views, by the way, about, you know, just society on a whole and how it can come together, do you think that there is a chance that, say, you would get elected in, just based on, or do you think right now with the current situation, maybe that's not the case because of maybe the government being a bit corrupt, or, you know, what are your views?
So very good question. First of all, in Israel, we have a British parliamentary system. So you must be familiar with the system. It's very similar, the coalitions and oppositions. So it's a very similar system. In fact, it's what the British had left when they left the land. When we kicked them out, we were able to create a system. And instead of creating something new that was fitting for both Israelis, Palestinians, Druzi, Bedouin, all the minorities and peoples that were living here, we just sort of adopted what existed, because right away we went into war and we never really had the time to develop a system and have a conversation of how we wanted to create a governmental system. However, for myself, look, my goal is to help push my people forward, to help change the reality on the ground and create a new reality, a better reality for my descendants to live in, for my friends and family and cousins and everyone else in this land to be able to live in together. That's my goal. So whatever role I can play in order to push that goal is the role that I will play. Now, the question is, you know, am I going to go into politics? I'm not going to close the door on that. It could very well be that the best path for me to help what I truly want to do is through politics. However, right now, you know, if I go into politics, I have to choose being right wing or left wing. And if I choose one or the other, already, first of all, if you look in Israel, the right is talking about security and identity, which is very important. And the left is talking about human rights, justice, and values, which is very important. Why do these have to contradict? So if I choose one side, the entire other side of the country will be against me just because I'm on the other side. So already the political system is built on divide and conquer, and people care about staying in power. So you have 4 years that you serve, you know, as a government or as a prime minister. And in order to get reelected, you have to do short-term strategies, short-term accomplishments in order to show that in the next election in order to get reelected. And the problem is that the politicians never think about long-term changes. You know, what can we do in 50 years to really change the country, to make real changes, not just small changes in order to get reelected. So right now, my path is not through politics, because I think I'm way more useful to influence people, have a message of uniting people. And the way the political system is structured right now, it wouldn't allow me to continue doing that. So if one day the political system changed, maybe, and if one day I were to create my own party that is not right wing or left wing and something that's united, then possibly too. However, for me, I always make sure that I keep in mind what is my true goal. It's not to get Rudy to a position, it's to get this nation, this country, this civilization, all the human beings living here forward. That's 100%. My goal.
That's good. No, yeah, that's good, man. Thank you for answering that question for me. Just going back, obviously, just very quickly, and I want to ask you this question. How long have you been involved in this on an influential level? So how long have you been doing it? And what I mean by doing it is obviously not just obviously your YouTube and Facebook, but how long have you been sort of motivated to do this sort of thing? Was it something you grew up, or was it you got to an age where you started to do research and then, you know, obviously because a lot of what you do obviously affects, say, religion and that, your religion and that sort of thing. So you'll speak passionately about that because that's something you've already followed. But I mean, as in, now you're talking on more of a mature sense of like, sort of with the governments and, you know, what they can do to change it. How long have you been motivated, if that makes sense?
Yeah, actually, this whole journey started in London, of all places.
Really?
So a little bit before that experience in London, I'll go over it. I was born in France. All of my grandparents were born in different countries. On my mom's side, Algeria and Morocco. My dad's side, Poland and Belgium. And all of my family members, all of my grandparents were kicked out of the lands that they were living in because they were Jews and not Polish, not Belgian, not Algerian, not Moroccan. So I was second generation. Both my parents were first generation born in France. I was born in France. At the age of 3, my family decided to move to Israel. Age of 5, moved to Miami. So growing up, I had a sort of identity crisis. When I go to school, I'm the French kid. When I visit my cousins in France, I'm the American cousin. I'm Jewish Ashkenaz and Jewish Sephardic, which are 2 different types of Jews. I'm also Moroccan and Polish and Belgian, but apparently in Morocco, I wasn't Moroccan, I was Jewish. And in Poland, we weren't Polish, we were Jewish. So all of a sudden, now that I'm not in Poland and not in Morocco, now I'm Moroccan, now I'm Polish. So there was a lot of confusion growing up as to when someone asked me, where are you from? What do I say? Because apparently it depends on who's asking me that question or where that question is being asked. So already at a very young age, I was asking myself deep questions of who I am, where am I from, what am I supposed to do, who am I supposed to be? And at the age of 7, I went through my first anti-Semitic experience in London. I took a trip with my mom and my younger brother. We did the red tour bus that does the tour of London. Yeah. And as we were ready to get on the bus, my mom had purchased the tickets. She gives the bus driver the tickets. We had 3 for me, my mom, and my younger brother. And she had a shirt that had Hebrew writing on it. And we got on the bus, and the bus driver looks at my mom's shirt and is like, "Excuse me, is that written in Jewish?" And she's like, "No, it's written in Hebrew, but it's the language of the Jewish people. If that's what you're asking." You know, it's as if someone's saying, "Is that written in Brazilian?" No, it's Portuguese, but, you know, maybe someone is just culturally not there, doesn't know, you know, no offense taken, no need to take offense on everything, you know, if there's no offense being meant. So no, it's the language is Hebrew. It's the language of the Jewish people. That's what you mean. And he's like, "Oh, so you guys are Jews?" And she's like, "Yeah, we're Jews. What's the problem?" It's like, "I don't want any Jews on my bus. You have to get off." I was like, "I don't know who you think you are. I grew up with a ton of anti-Semitism in France. I'm not getting off this bus." And he got up, grabbed my mom, and threw her off. And everything, like, for me, went slow motion, although I'm sure things were going pretty fast if you looked at the watch. But people got involved, and I was just like, I froze. I was 7 years old, and I sort of felt guilty since I still feel guilty for that moment to not know what to do, what to do physically to protect my mother, because I'm the eldest of 4 boys. So I felt in the moment as the eldest that I was supposed to do something, not knowing how to deal with that emotionally, not knowing how to deal with that mentally, intellectually, or even ideologically, understanding the greater ideas as to what's happening. And understandably, a 7-year-old kid is not supposed to know how to deal with that situation. But for me, from that moment on, I promised myself that the next time I'd see any form of anti-Semitism, I'd be ready physically, intellectually, ideologically, mentally, emotionally, in every single way. And the second thing that moment did for me is it taught me who I was. I realized that it didn't matter where I was born, where I grew up, where I lived in, where I traveled to, what passport I had, which were all different answers, that I was a Jew. And so I started asking myself deeper questions, like, you know, the world considers Judaism as a religion, but is it a religion? Because a religion is just a belief system for any people. And Judaism isn't just a belief system, because if you look at Christianity, a religion, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're not a Christian, right? You're either another religion of another belief system, or you're agnostic, or you're atheist, right? And if you want to become Christian, all you need to do is accept Jesus, dunk yourself in water, and you're Christian. If you want to become Muslim, you wash your hands, you say the prayer, and you become Muslim. If you accept the teachings of Buddha and the philosophy of Buddha, you're a Buddhist. If you reject those philosophies, you're not a Buddhist. So when we look at Judaism, even if you don't believe in the Torah, which is our, you know, testament, or you don't believe in the concept of God or in Hashem, you're still a Jew, even if you reject the belief systems. And in order to become a Jew, you don't just accept Judaism. You have to go through years of a process of adopting an identity, a history, a culture, aspirations, even suffering that comes along with being a Jew, similar to how you could actually become Native American. There are many tribes that have years of a process in order for you to join that tribe and eventually be accepted by an elder council. Same thing when converting to Judaism. You're joining a nation. So I realized that in that moment that Judaism wasn't a religion. It definitely has a belief system that's a core part of what it is, but it's not mainly that. What it is basically we had a native civilization like the Aztecs, like the Aboriginals, like the Tibetans, like the Yazidis, Kurds, Coptics, all these Maoris, right? We were a native civilization in the land of Judea. And when the Roman Empire came, they kicked the vast majority of us out into different lands. And in order to preserve our identity, our history, our culture, and the notion of one day coming back home to Judea, to Israel, we created a portable suitcase, and we called this suitcase Judaism. And within Judaism, we packed in our culture, our history, our language, our laws, our values, our connection to land, a belief system, everything inside, and passed it down generation to generation with the aspiration of one day coming back home, Shana B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And we've been saying that for 2,000 years. I mean, even in things that I guess is more pop culture, I'm sure you've seen in some movies where there's a Jewish wedding and they smash a glass and yell, Mazel Tov. You know, it's something very popular in pop culture. What is the smashing of that glass that we've been doing for 2,000 years? It's the destruction of Jerusalem and the promise that the kids from this marriage will one day come back to Jerusalem and rebuild Jerusalem.
Do you know where I saw that? Sorry, very quickly to interrupt you. Do you know where I saw that? A Drake video, because Drake's Jewish. Yeah. So I seen it in a Drake video. I didn't know that. Obviously, when I first started listening to it.
And I'm sure Drake doesn't know that either, by the way.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Exactly. No, but that's what I saw. But I know what you mean. Yeah, I see. Sorry, carry on. I've seen a funny bit where I've seen Drake do it in the video. Sorry, carry on.
Oh, but you see, like, even a lot of Jews don't know what these things represent, because when you're in the diaspora for so long, you didn't only go through physical colonization, you also went through something called mental colonization. You start to forget what tribe you come from, what's your language, what's your culture, what's your heritage, and you start to adopt another identity, different values, different things, and assimilate and completely lose your culture. So right now, the process of reviving a civilization, a native civilization that in history, no native civilization was ever revived. No language that was lost of a native civilization was also ever revived. We revived our language, we revived our culture, we revived our land, and it's a process, right? There's a lot of things that we're getting wrong because, 2,000 years of mental slavery. So it's a process of coming back and figuring out. So for me, that moment changed my life. I'm very grateful actually for that moment. You shouldn't only be grateful for the good things that happen. You should also be grateful for sometimes the difficult times of your life, which allow you to grow, to heal, to become stronger, to be able to adapt and deal with things in a better way. So that moment changed my life. And from that moment on, things have evolved. I joined the army right out of high school. In Israel, I served as a paratrooper in the IDF. When I finished the army, I moved to the US. Did school both at UCLA and Columbia University. I started the Israel group over there. And then after that, I spent a year in different countries around the world and came back home to Israel. And right now I'm doing my MBA because I don't want to make money off of being someone that's running an organization and depending on donations. I want to be able to sustain myself, and I want to be able to keep what I'm doing pure. I want to do this from a passion perspective and not from a financial perspective.
No, that's good, man. No, that's really good. It's like I said to you, like the whole idea behind this section of my podcast, because we, with this podcast, we do talk about some funny issues, some serious issues, but then separately, I've done these one-to-one interviews where I just talk with, say, not even just young people, but people in general, different what they're doing in their different backgrounds and different walks of life, and it's really good to have different sort of views. For example, the question I had for you, because what you mentioned a lot there obviously was what I heard a lot was to do with sort of religion. Do you think, obviously in today's climate, so obviously what's going on around the world now, if you look at it, do you think that possibly that religion is probably the biggest cause, diversion of religion? So like you got the X amount of religions here. Do you think it's the biggest cause of, say, destruction today in terms of everyone having so many beliefs? Again, this is just a question that I was asked to sort of ask you, but having sort of, Christianity, Muslims, Jewish, and you've got Catholics even, there's so many different types of Christianity, for example. It's crazy. But would you say today, given obviously the scenarios with war and what's going on around the world, would you play it more down to ignorance, and that's probably people's ignorance and education of their respective religions and treating other people with respect? Or would you say that religions sort of made that divide in terms of what people are going through today? And that's from all aspects, if you get what I mean. Sorry.
I mean, it depends how we define religion. If we see religion just as the belief system in a God, deity, book, or prophet, then there's something pure about that. It's for
Yes,
that individual to connect with a higher power
100%.
for their own reasons and their own relationship with that in order for them to be a better person and to live happier or whatever else. So that in itself is something beautiful that I think the world needs.
100%.
And there's all sorts of ways to use something that is beautiful and to use it for something that's not beautiful. And you can see that not only when it comes to religious beliefs, even if you look at like communism and capitalism, both are responsible for so much death and pain and slavery and so much other things.
Yeah.
So the idea of, the fundamental ideas maybe aren't so bad, but it could always be used and put into practice as something bad. So I wouldn't say that religion is the problem. I would say that human nature of us creating in and out groups and of competing with one another instead of seeing each other as one. A big thing in my philosophy is I see the world as a body, right? And the body has different, we're one, but we're also not one, because in a body you have different organs, right? And each organ needs to know their job, needs to know, it needs to work with one another, needs not
I watched
to
the video where you said this,
So we should be able to have different nations. We don't have to all be one human. Like, yes, we're one race, we're one body, we're one planet. We all need to have love for one another. We're all equal, but we can also have our individuality. Also, when it comes to your family can be different than your cousin's family, right? You can be different than your brother and sister. You can be different than your parents. You can also have your individuality, but you could also be part of a greater collective. And we have to figure out a way to create that greater body to function properly. And when the body's organs don't function properly, the body is sick. When the body is sick, you get all sorts of repercussions with that, which is why we see wars, we see all sorts of things happening now with Corona. That could, if it's not a biological weapon, used from, some other country, who knows what Corona is? We don't know. In 50 years, maybe we'll know. We'll look back and we'll say, oh, we should have known, but we really don't have any information.
No information.
A reaction of the world of being like, you're harming the world, and now the world reacts to that. So who knows where it comes from? But in order for us to cure disease, poverty, wars, all these problems that exist, we have to find a way to unite with a greater vision of uniting.
I think, you've hit the nail on the head there, definitely. Because I think when I look at it, for example, we're just going back to obviously your story about your mother and the problems that she had when she comes to London, for instance, where it started off, your passions and your beliefs and where it's taken you today. When you were telling me that, I was sort of like, I can't believe that's happened. But at the same time, given what I've grown up in around London, in general, it's as bad as it sounds, I'm not surprised. And I'll tell you why. Because here, just to compare, for example, you've got many groups of people who sort of isolate themselves and I would say spread hate is probably the pleasant word for them, but they are very negative towards colour, religion, countries you're from, that sort of thing. So they're called for example, the EDL, which is the English Defence League. So they're like a group of people. Their main targets, from what I can see from videos, is Muslims, for example. Now they will say that all Muslims are terrorists. That's what they will say. And it's really negative, but you see that divide here, and I think when I see stuff like that, it makes me angry, because I think in order for you to say to have a world where everyone's one, everyone can have their differences, beliefs, but for example, someone's color, someone's race or religion should never come into it. And at the moment, unfortunately, that's one of the main problems I think in society today. But I genuinely think, does anyone have an answer on how to fix that? Everyone can say we need to do this and do that, but it's so complicated. In England especially, just speaking here, I've had numerous comments made to me about my appearance before. Obviously, I do look a bit more well presented, but we've got no barbers here at the moment, no haircuts, so obviously I can't have anything done. But people make assumptions about me. They get them wrong half the time, but they make assumptions about where I'm from. My mum being Irish and English, then my dad being from Portugal and Mozambique. So my grandfather was from Mozambique. He was so third. You could say third or second generation myself, but my dad being brought up in Portugal. But what you find in Portugal, for example, is a lot of Portuguese people So obviously my dad was mixed. So my nan was white, and my granddad was black. So obviously he come from a mixed background. But then obviously anyone, so my black grandfather, for instance, if you had that in Portugal, a lot of them were, I'm talking hundreds of years ago, slaves to Portugal, which is why you see Angolans, Mozambiques in Portugal, and people and second generation people Portuguese. But I mean, it's crazy because I've had a few experiences myself where I'm called names. I'm called, I've been called a terrorist before just because of my appearance. It's crazy. You do see a lot of these things, and for me, like I laugh at it because I don't know what else to do. I can sit there and get angry, like you say. Sometimes you're not mentally or physically ready for it. I think the problem that in society today is we don't educate everyone. There isn't education there from a government level, my government anyway. I don't think they educate enough. I mean, it wasn't long ago that you had Boris Johnson, for example, calling a lady who wore a burqa, like sort of burqa full outfit, called her a postbox. So it was like that's the prime minister of our country. So when he's setting that example, what does that say for everyone else? So for me, it's I think a lot of people need education definitely on different issues, where it be sort of where you're from. Not that it should matter, but where you're from. I don't think there's enough in England personally. I don't think it's enough about it taught in school. I think it should be taught more in schools. I think when you start from kids, say for instance, the messages you try and spread are really positive, and I can see it, and you want to make a change. So say for instance, like if I was Prime Minister of Israel, for example, yeah, I would be like, okay, so this what you've got, what you're doing, let's put that into a curriculum for kids at school. So then the generation growing up, if you get what I mean, are more educated on it. Because obviously, like I said to you, it's these sort of issues, people aren't educated on it enough. And I think some of them, like for instance, racism, a lot of people listen to, maybe if their parents are racist, then they'll listen to that without any free thinking for themselves. So they'll just believe what their parents say, because that's what their parents are like. And I think that's definitely a thing. We have to change the mentality of people. I think for anything to work in society, you've got, we can change. Everyone makes mistakes, but it's what you do going forward. So, that was when I watched your videos, I saw that a lot. And hence why it got me to contact you to do an interview. But really, really passionate stuff you do, man. Seriously, like, you don't see it enough. You don't see it enough. And to be honest with you, you're the first person I've seen on YouTube who looks at it from both sides, if that makes sense. So for instance, the conflicts at the moment with Palestine, for instance, you look at it from both angles, not just one angle, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I try to have a more holistic perspective. And although, I never pretend to be a referee or I'm in the middle. I'm Israeli, I'm Jewish, this is my home, this is my people, this is my nation. But I don't see my cousins, Palestinians or Arabs, as my enemy. I see them as my allies. I see them as my family. I see them as people that live in the same land and will always live in the same land with me. So we have to create a reality that is greater than just the movies we live in. So think about it this way. We're conditioned to see our reality as we're the protagonist and they're the antagonist. And they're conditioned to live in a movie where they're the protagonist and the Israelis are the antagonist. And there's a wall dividing us two. There's an inability to communicate between each other. And we get conditioned to see the other as the enemy. And so we can't create a reality where you can be pro both. You always hear if you're pro-Israel, you have to be anti-Palestinian, or if you're pro-Palestinian, you have to be anti-Israel. Why? Why can't you be pro both? Why can't you acknowledge the suffering that is happening on Israel's side? Why can't you acknowledge the suffering that's happening on the Palestinian side? Why can't you acknowledge the history and connection and the identity of both populations? And although their relationship to the land is different, they're both real and they both exist here today. So that's a big problem. And in the school system, it's not only the concept of racism and hatred and xenophobia and bigotry, it's also like financial literacy. Like there's a lot of things that should be taught in schools to
100%.
To stand up. And the way the school systems are structured, I grew up in the US, so it's not that far apart from westernized first world countries mentality in the school system. It teaches people to be employees. Right? Write a paper for a professor and write just what you need to write so that professor gives you a good grade. don't develop your creativity, don't go into like your passions. Like it's all about, you have to take these classes, you have to do this. And yeah, I understand that, everyone should have a certain level and experience with math and with science. You should be cultured
100%.
with a wide variety of topics, but it doesn't allow someone to develop themselves. It forces someone to work in order to get a piece of paper, in order to go in to get hired and get fed into this rat race. And then, we end up complaining, but it starts from the ground up also with an education.
I think, yeah, definitely. I think you're right about the schools, 100%, because here, it's a big problem is they don't teach you, for example, and it sounds really small, but it's not. Kids, for example, like a lot of people that I've done, we've done podcast sessions where we talk in small bits about this, and we say, there's no education on saving money, and there's no education on buying houses. There's no education on, those sorts of things, like you say, financials that are really important. But instead, there's more. There's a saying here. I don't know if you've heard it before, yeah. But so we will learn Pythagoras theorem, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Kids will learn Pythagoras theorem, but won't know how to save money and buy a house when they come out of school. But they know the Pythagoras theorem, so that's going to take them far in life. Do you know what I mean? It's like you learn. It's not saying it's not important to learn, but the basics aren't taught here. Definitely not. And it's been like that for years. Even when I was at school, which only 11 years. I'm 25, so about 11 years ago, and 11 years ago. And even then, it was more just focused on exams. You need to go to do this. You need to study this, or you need to learn this.
Producer instead of a creator.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to do this. There wasn't a time I've probably seen where they push someone's dreams. It may be different now, slightly different, because a lot of people you see on the internet, for example, there's especially in the UK, like the social media scene here, loads of people are benefiting from it really positively. They're opening businesses from it. They can have a life because of maybe what they do. If they're doing comedy or whatever they're doing, it doesn't really make a difference. You've got a guy who called the financial expert here, and he's got like a YouTube channel, and he's like I don't know if you've heard of this guy. His name's Martin Lewis. So he's like a money expert in our country. And he's got his own TV programs where he shows you how to buy a house, what loans to take out. Don't take a loan here. He advises you on it. And there's a similar guy like that on YouTube now. Again, this guy had I think it was the most basic education at school. He didn't go to university. He didn't do this. This was all he taught himself. If you taught this to a younger generation, what is it? Nothing negative is going to come out of it from teaching them this. So what's so bad teaching them about it? It's definitely a good point to raise. I think that all over the world they can take lessons on that. I mean, in the US, do they do that in terms of, is there that education there for people, young kids, or?
Again, I'm 26, so I'm a similar age to you, and I haven't been in high school since 2011. But in my experience, it was very basic. And I also went to a public high school, so it might be different in private schools. But the system was very much so, you need to produce for your teacher, right? Not based on what you want to develop ideas and be creative, but more so write the opinions of what your professor or your teacher has in order for you to get a good grade, in order for you to continue and to pass on. Same thing in college. Of course, occasionally you have an inspiring teacher that really is someone that should be in the educational system, but most of the times it's people that give you busy work in order for you to pass a grade and for you to continue, then to get this sheet of paper that is supposed to define your value and tell you who you are and what you're able to do and what opportunities and doors are open. It's a system that it doesn't work. It's a system that works in some ways, but it leads to a lot of people suffering and people not being able to develop themselves, people not being able to accomplish their and achieve their potentials. So we have to find a way to change that.
No, brilliant. But yeah, Rudy, I think we've come to the end today. The interview. It's been really good talking to you, man. Seriously, like I said, I wanted to do this for a while. I watch a lot of videos. I'm subscribed to your page. Yeah, I watch it all now, man. Facebook, it's good, man. Like I said to you, is keep on doing what you're doing because it's really positive what you're doing. Refreshing, as say a fan of yours watching this stuff. Yeah, it's crazy. Obviously, sometimes you're gonna get the people who are a bit negative in terms of their thinking and they're very narrow-minded, but like I said to you, I don't know how you do it so coolly. I can tell you.
Sorry? Why. I can tell you why I stay calm.
Go on.
Well, first of all, I've always been someone that's been pretty balanced and calm. I've never, sometimes when you get mad, you see red. I've never experienced that. So naturally, I'm thankful to be able to have a calm temperament. But when I get into a conversation, I realize that the person that I'm speaking to, or even the people that the people around this conversation, it may be their first time actually hearing the perspective of an Israeli or a Jew. So it's my responsibility in that moment on behalf of all Jews and Israelis to do the best job that I can to portray our narrative, our story, and our culture in order for that person to understand. Also, I never know how bad the person's opinions are going to be, right? When I'm engaging with someone, I don't know what he's going or she is. So I always give the benefit of the doubt. And there are many times that I am able to change the person's opinions. So already having done that so many times, I have to try, even if I end up failing. And even if I fail in that moment, I might have planted some seeds that eventually one day will grow within that person's mind and be like, wow, these views of being anti-Semitic and anti all this stuff, it doesn't make any sense now that I've learned this and learned this later on. But because I had that conversation, that allowed me to change in the future. So I think in the moment, if I make it about myself, of course I can get offended. Of course I despise a lot of the things that are being said to me in those moments, but it's my responsibility to try my best to transcend that, to be able to use my energy and to channel that in a way that helps create a positive outcome of the situation, not just a negative, egotistical confrontation.
That's really good, man. No, that's really good. Good. Thanks for explaining that for me. But yeah, it's really good. Definitely, I think speech is the most powerful tool that we have. It's better than your fists. It is. It's stronger than your fists. You don't. It's very easy to say you can't solve anything with your fists. I think your mouth is the biggest, loudest tool you'll ever have. So yeah, you're right. Definitely. Where can we find you? Just let my viewers know, and
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook. You can look up my name, Rudy Rochman, RudyRochman. On Instagram, it's Rudy_Israel. On YouTube, also Rudy Rochman. Twitter, also Rudy_Rochman. So yeah.
Yeah, make sure you subscribe to this guy. And to be honest with you, regardless of what your opinion is, it's definitely educational. So do look at it because it may change your view, or it made me learn new things that I didn't know watching some of your videos. So definitely, check him out. Follow us on Instagram, Waffletop PC, and then Facebook, SoundCloud, and Spotify is Waffletop Podcast, and also YouTube is Waffletop Podcast, where you can find all our content, audio and videos. My name is Paulo. I've been the biggest talker. This has been a pleasure today, Rudy. Thank you very much for taking this call with me. Thank you very much for taking this call with me. This is the one-to-one interviews with Rudy Rochman and Paulo. But yeah, thank you guys. Like, share, and subscribe. This will be up on YouTube. So guys, check it out. Thank you.